Good morning to everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning for our cybersecurity for the remote workforce webinar. We have with us Jeff Dawley, who is the president and founder of Cybersecurity Compliance Corp. And I know, Jeff, you've certainly been busy doing lots of these presentations. I saw, I think you were featured with Durham College and in a couple of other things. So we're happy to have you here today to teach us what we need to know. I think, we're sort of getting to the point where in the workplace, we understand how important cybersecurity is, but now that we've switched and we're all working from home, it's a great opportunity to check back in and think about it now too. So thank you again for being here. Thank you everyone else for joining us, and we'll begin. Andrew, did you want to mention anything else?
No, that's it. We're good.
Okay. So welcome, and over to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to take everybody through some information, and then we'll talk a little bit about tips from home. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up to your camera. Awesome. All right. Everybody see the first page of the slideshow?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I happen to spend some time in cybersecurity every once in a while. Over the last few years, my focus has been on the practical application of cybersecurity rather than the intensely technical. So when I look at our workforce and the folks that we have at home, they suddenly found themselves having to work from home every day. And while the occasional meeting was something that they could isolate for and handle without any exposure, working from home every day introduced some other risks and challenges. So without spending too much time on an introduction, this is the big, bad, scary person everybody is afraid is coming for their data, right? That hooded, scary figure from the commercials who's hiding out there in the ether, trying to hack into your system and compromise your data. Unfortunately, that's not reality for most cybercrime that happens. Cyber attacks are not some vigilante individual. They're generally quite organized and intended to pick low-hanging fruit from individuals who are distracted or compromised or vulnerable. So I'm going to talk through some of the issues that we're facing today and how they compound the exposure to cyber risk, both being remote, but also being distracted with bigger problems. So I'm going to start with an image from a news clip that's a good reminder for anybody who does these types of calls, webcasts, work calls. When you're on camera, you need to pay attention to what else is in the frame. This fine gentleman in Hawaii was giving a traffic update report and managed to share his password with everyone who tuned into that news station, compromising their network internally. This isn't the only example of this. Television stations have been shut down in France and in the US because somebody has inadvertently put passwords on sticky notes on a board behind them. Phishing emails continue to be one of the top attack vectors. People are vulnerable, machines not so much. The technology for protecting environments is actually relatively robust. But when it comes to people, comes to individuals, you're only as good as your own awareness. And all it takes is one person inside your network to click on the wrong email and you are compromised. So there are lots of tips and tricks for determining whether an email is legitimate, looking for domains that are different than expected. You can see here the actual address is at sheridanc.on.ca instead of Amazon, and it's supposed to be coming from Amazon. Don't click on links, and if you're at all suspicious, make sure that you find a different communication channel to confirm the validity of the email. And we'll talk about that a bit later as well. IoT, when you end up at home unexpectedly, you probably didn't think to unplug or turn off your Google Home or your Alexa. You probably didn't think about the 7 phones and 3 printers and multiple laptops, perhaps the 2 or 3 that you got from the school for your growing family. These all introduce new devices to the network that bring risk along with them. And you really don't know who's browsing, where they're browsing, what they're clicking on some of those devices. The worst part about some of these IoT devices, some of these smart devices like alarm systems and cameras and the like, is that their security is often far behind network security. So you may have a really robust network and put a really terrible smart device on it and open yourself up to an attack. Many companies have found themselves attacked through their HVAC system, where they had a very robust network, had an HVAC system put in where they could control it remotely through the net, and found themselves attacked through the security flaws of that system that was inside their network. This is my new favorite word for 2020, Zoom bombing. I can't believe that we've had to invent a new word for attacking somebody's online meeting. Really just challenging when you're in an online environment and you don't know what security controls to put in place. I think it's important for everybody to remember that a tool is just a tool. Zoom is getting a lot of bad press because of their security flaws, and certainly there's more that they could have done to help protect people, in particular because it's a system that's used by school boards. Some countries are now banning it for use with students because of the security flaws. They'll be addressed. It's just a tool. But if you're going to be using Zoom like we are today, make sure that you pull up a couple of best practice articles before you do that talk about how to lock the meeting, that talk about how to restrict access, so that you're not that low-hanging fruit that somebody can easily hack into and either embarrass you or create even more significant problems. I put a couple of small company names up. You might recognize 1 or 2 of them. All of these companies have been attacked, and just about all of them have been attacked through social engineering attacks, not through brute force hacks. So everybody's a target. And as much as these are all big company names, you would look at them all and say, well, they all survived their attack. You probably couldn't name very many small companies that were attacked and shut down for periods of time that survived. So you need to be aware that everybody's a target. It doesn't matter what you've spent on cybersecurity. Be aware, try to prevent the attack, and then be prepared if an attack does come. When it comes to the value of your data, I find generally people don't get this right. People are afraid of having their credit card information stolen or their bank information stolen. And sure, if you've got a couple $1 million sitting in your bank account, granted, that's an area of concern, losing your bank information. For most of us, protecting our bank information is important, and our credit card information is important because it has that personal, it's stealing from you. And now your credit cards are insured, and so there are other protections. But very few people would recognize that the higher value within their information set is actually their corporate email that's been validated. We had an individual come in last year talking to us on the sales side, and he came in and said, "Jeff, you should be so proud of me. I was working and I got an email from our president. President email said, I'm in Africa, I need money, please wire, this Bitcoin or these iTunes cards. We need to pay a local mechanic because we've broken down and there's no access to cash here." And he said, I know my president's in Africa, but I think this is suspicious. So he found a way to contact the president, who confirmed that the message wasn't from him. Unfortunately, the next thing he did was to send an email back to respond to that ransomware email, that phishing email, and say, "Aha, I got you. I know that this isn't real. I'm reporting it to the police." And he felt really happy, really proud of himself. What he didn't realize is that he had just delivered value into that phishing campaign to the tune of $500 US. The reason that it's worth so much is a valid corporate email legitimizes all future phishing campaigns. If somebody receives an email, even if it's somebody they don't know, and they go to look it up on the web somewhere and it's a valid email, they're more likely to click. So corporate emails are a higher value than a healthcare record, a higher value than a credit card. And that's something, again, that people just don't think about. You really need to consider the value of all your data, not just what might be financial in nature. Very important as well. When we talk about cybersecurity, cyber attacks, cyber anything, it's really common for people to think that cyber is technology, relates directly to technology, is only involving technology. When we speak to boards of directors, founders, executives, presidents, people who run companies, it's always the same conversation. Cybersecurity used to be a technology problem. Now, with the proliferation of devices and remote work, it really is a business risk. Our reliance on IT has become so significant that any disruption on the IT side can do significant damage to your business. Studies have found that almost all cyber attacks are perpetrated through social engineering. So this is phishing attacks. This is, social media. This is clicking on the wrong link. This is insider attacks, unfortunately. So it's great that you have technology in place protecting your business in the form of a firewall, antivirus. But if you're not training your people, if you're not protecting things by testing and assessing your people, then you're leaving the biggest gap still open to attack. Something that is very relevant to today's environment. There are millions and millions and millions of spam emails out there. Obviously, it's grown over time. But to give you an idea of how quickly threats scale, the coronavirus, COVID-19, has only really been in the press for 3.5 months. And everybody being sent home, everybody worried about what's going on, following stats. My 9-year-old, one of his questions every day is, can I see the stats? Can I see the numbers? We don't show them. One of the challenges that you get is people are, one, emotional. And two, they're distracted. And you put all that together in a home environment with kids and dogs and kids and partners, and you suddenly find yourself distractedly clicking on something you shouldn't. Or as you're looking at that email that you shouldn't click on, your dog runs across the keyboard. So these are significant risks, and criminal elements, cyber attackers are aware of this. They will take advantage of it. We'll get to some tips for how you can avoid being one of the victims. Take some steps to safeguard your information. But I wanted to set the stage by saying, look, malicious spam emails around COVID-19 are up to 200,000 separate versions. There are 81,000 malicious files. This was as of March 27th. 81,000 malicious files being sent around. I think this could be spoofed from CRA, from any government agency that you've seen, from your bank, from friends, malicious URLs, clicking on a website, going to a website that you think legitimately is giving you data on COVID-19. And unfortunately, as you click, it implants something on your machine that compromises you. So it hasn't taken long for the threats to grow significantly. The way that you stop these types of threats is by, again, keeping things up to date on your machines in terms of protection, but really being aware. Being aware is critical. If you are not aware of the threats that are out there, you are more likely to become a victim. Bad actors are a name that we ascribe to groups that tend to perpetrate attacks and hacks. I'm going to start at the bottom, only because when you think about, most people think about being hacked, and they use the term, I've been hacked. They're thinking of, this individual, that picture at the start of the presentation, somebody sitting in their basement or garage, with a bunch of machines and screens trying to break into people's networks. Hackers and hacktivists are not targeting your run-of-the-mill average person. They're looking for bragging rights. They're looking to make a statement. You know, they're causing mischief. Insiders are a group where you've got someone inside your network who compromises you. You know, employees who don't feel they've been treated properly. There are a number of insider issues you might face. Competitors, it gets interesting now when everybody was in one place working off of a central server. You know, competitors might spend a little bit of time trying to get in. Remote, there are lots of steps you can take. It's pretty tough when everybody's completely separated and all of the data is in different places. Your competitors are still a reason to be concerned, but they're facing the same challenges you are. Nation states, again, really unlikely that they're attacking you personally, or even you're a small or medium-sized business. But as we've all read in the papers for the last several years, nation states are active in the cybercrime environment. And finally, the root of most of the phishing attacks and other broadly dispersed cyber attacks that you hear about are organized crime. So this is groups that intentionally broadly distribute phishing emails and other campaigns in order to reap a small percentage of the reward. Small dollars generally, could be larger, but they're interested in getting paid. They're not just interested in bringing down a company. Happier for them if they actually get their money out of the attack and then restore all the data so they get a reputation of doing that and get paid the next time. I've heard different people tell stories of attackers who have attacked a system, ransomware, you know, $10,000 of ransom demanded, and they bring a negotiator in, and the negotiator says, yeah, absolutely, we can negotiate them down, but they're looking for the money. They don't want to leave you broken because you're going to go tell everyone that they never release your data. So even the attacker is motivated to release your data after the attack so they can continue attacking and being successful at getting paid. So it's that group that we're really most concerned about when we're at home. I put this chart in so that folks, again, that are running businesses, especially small, medium-sized businesses like ours, it is so important that you address cybersecurity, that you pay attention to the things you need to do to reduce your risk. 60% of small businesses are out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack. That's an astounding number. Think about the work that you go to establish your business, to get your business idea out to the public, attract your customers, financing, whatever you needed to scrape together to do that. And the only reason that you find yourself sitting on the sidelines out of business is that you failed to educate your team. So it's important. It's extremely important, even in times like these, that you find the time to address cybersecurity for yourself and for your organization. This is my favorite barrier slide. Unfortunately, the barriers to making decisions around cybersecurity are actually a little more effective than these barriers are. Problem number one, and we're all facing an increasing problem with this now that we're sort of in a wait and see mode with financial pressures. And I'm not going to minimize that. I've spent a large chunk of my career as a CFO. And so scrambling for finances is not easy and takes up a lot of your energy and time. Unfortunately, we were already facing a global shortage of cybersecurity resources. It's only going to increase, and therefore prices will be increasing. Large companies will buy up those resources, driving up price even further, leaving small enterprises wondering where they should turn for their help. Combine that with just an incredible amount of noise. If you've ever tried to look through the media for information on cybersecurity, you know that it's incredibly confusing. You're inundated with stories about data breaches, about remediation, about gaps, about privacy, about data protection. It is immensely challenging to try to find out, figure out where to get started. It is a huge problem. So the right answer to that is you need to pick somewhere to get started. You can't just put your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening or it isn't a risk. So we're going to talk again through the presentation a little bit about how you get started and cut through all that noise. Of course, the biggest part of all of that noise is we have an overriding, very loud, very strong message out there right now that is dominating most of our lives. You can't let that create a situation for you where you take risks you wouldn't ordinarily take. So be aware. So that's the fun part of the presentation with the pictures, you know, and the fun graphics. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifics that relate to your business. First of all, what your business can do for its resources or what your employer can do for you. It's important to go through some of these so that you understand where those options are and that there is help for you should you have questions. And then we'll talk a little bit about tips for individuals. And then I'm happy to open it up to anybody on the line for questions for their specific circumstances. I'm gonna take some coffee first. So I want to start with a group that includes most of your human element of cybersecurity. As an organization, you need to have policies in place. It's important that you combine those policies with education and assessment tools that let your team continue to be to keep policies top of mind. Compliance testing, we'll go through those in some detail, but that's one group. Second group is really around technology security. So this is how do you connect remotely? When is it okay to use different tools and different types of tools of different levels of security? Authentication, authorization, and access controls is really about what do you let people see when they get into your network? What should you be allowed to do? And what barriers do you need to put up internally in the network to prevent a compromise if somebody happens to come on with an infected access point? And finally, securing endpoints and devices. And that's, you know, those individual tablets, computers, et cetera, that you have at home. Finally, we'll talk about disaster recovery planning. And for those of us that are spending time at home and have a little bit of time on our hands, it is a really good time to download that disaster recovery and business continuity template. Using this experience as a great example of a business continuity issue, tailor it for your business and make sure that in the future when these things happen, you're prepared. So I'm going to start with policies. Policies need to be available to your team, whether they're in the office or not. It shouldn't always only be available on your network, so consider sending it around as a refresher to people whenever these events happen. It's important that you consider including an acceptable use of technology policy, privacy, and privacy will be different between different industries. Certainly make sure that you are complying with your specific industry requirements around privacy. Data protection, social media, and photographs and images. And those last two are certainly 10 years ago, may not have been in most sets of policies. Now it's critical. You know, a good example is you're looking at a screen like ours, somebody takes a screenshot and publishes it. Have you got permission from everyone on the call to publish their images? So you really need to think about that. Make sure that you're up to date on your company's policies. Assessments. It's great to have policies, but if you're not ever checking to see whether people are compliant, if you're not ever assessing your cybersecurity environment, then you're still leaving some pretty significant gaps. So this is less about technology and more about picking a framework that covers your entire exposure. It has to cover your people, it has to cover policies, it has to cover disaster recovery. It has to tell you things like have a public relations firm on speed dial, in a place outside your network. You need contacts that you can call if there's an attack. part of planning around cybersecurity is planning to be attacked and knowing that you've got steps to take after you are. So we recommend a framework called NIST CSF, Cybersecurity Framework. It rolls up to 5 easy to understand functions, and it runs the full life cycle of cybersecurity. And then it drops down into 108 individual controls that create a roadmap once you've done your assessment, creates a roadmap that you can use as your budget is available to start closing those gaps. In this day and age, there's no excuse for not understanding where your exposure is. If anybody needs help with things like that, please feel free to reach out. More than happy to help. This is something that is near and dear to our hearts. We think assessments are the only appropriate starting point for assessing and addressing your risk. And finally, education and compliance testing. And while assessments, if they're done by a consulting firm, can be quite expensive, there are tools that make them less expensive. Education and compliance is dirt cheap. There is no excuse, there is no reason for you not to be running online education on a monthly basis for your teams and compliance testing in the form of phishing campaigns. People who aren't tested at the end of an education module don't retain one. So I've got kids at home. I've got kids in primary school, and I've learned more about grade 2 and grade 4 math than I ever thought I would again in my life. It's fantastic, but I also know that it means nothing when they go through the exercises if they're not quizzed or tested at the end. It does not stick. They don't remember it the next day. Where if they've gone through a regular reinforcement in the form of a quiz, boy, it tends to stick with them a little more. So when you put your education in place, make sure that you're also running compliance testing campaigns with that. And again, we're more than happy to help with that, as are potentially your IT provider or security consultant, whoever you deal with. But make sure you're asking for help in getting those things in place. Also a great time right now, these things run 5 to 10 minutes per session. It's not a significant, it's not like pulling everyone into a room once a year for 3 hours. We're talking about, just a few minutes a month that keeps it top of mind. All right, remote access methods. So we get a lot of questions about this. It's really common for people to be concerned about how they're connecting to their business network. And one of the challenges that we have, and all 3 of these elements are going to be quite business specific. So I'd encourage you to talk to your IT support team, or again, reach out to resources that you know who can give you some advice based on your specific situation. I'm going to start at the least secure and work my way up to the most secure. Direct application access, where you're logging into the application from your machine, where there's a direct connection that isn't secure, that is a real challenge. So I don't recommend that for most secure applications or confidential information. Remote desktop access isn't significantly different. It's a little bit better, but it's really where you use a remote desktop tool on your machine. When you click on it, launch the program, it logs into a machine in another location. So a desktop computer back at the office, and then you are effectively working off that office desktop. So that it's just a way for you to access everything that you would normally access, but it isn't the most secure way of doing things. The best advice I have for everybody on the call is, if you have not moved to the cloud with in particular your back-end solutions like payroll and accounting, this is the time. Operating in the cloud is more secure than operating at home or in a hosted environment, unless you're spending an awful lot of money. Portals are able to incorporate multi-factor authentication, meaning you use a password, but you also might have a texted code to your phone you need to put in. This type of security is important to keeping data safe, to keeping your information safe, giving you a little bit of the ability to relax about your security. VPNs are equally strong. A VPN is that fully secure encrypted connection between 2 points. So if you've got an employer who has a hosted location and they've installed your accounting software in that location, they might have put a VPN connection on your local machine, your notebook. So you open up the VPN connection to establish that security, and then you can work in that program on the server. So those are strong options. Your IT team, your support team, if you haven't asked questions about how you connect to your data, these are questions that you should ask. If you're a doctor, if you're in health information, if you're dealing with other confidential information, I can tell you that remote desktop and direct application access would be a complete non-starter. In terms of authentication, authorization, and access controls, and again, I know this is a lot of information on the slides. I do this around working from home and empowering workforces that are remote. Rather than creating a presentation and just talking to it, I think it's important for everybody to have takeaways that they can refer back to. So this is in effect that checklist that you'd want to use in your discussions internally or when looking at your own situation. So access controls, authentication. Absolutely need to consider what people are accessing when they get into your network. It's not acceptable for you to have a mix of confidential and non-confidential information on your system, have roles that only use one or the other, and yet when they come in, everybody's using the same access level. Your systems should all have roles. Those roles should define what elements of the network can be accessed. You need to have barriers in place so that if somebody comes in and infects your network in a non-confidential area, that the confidential information is still protected. Use at least two-factor authentication. So a password and a security question, a password and a rotating key, or a text to a phone. Multi-factor authentication is the standard for security. If you don't have it enabled in even your personal accounts, your Google accounts, it is not just appropriate, but important that you make those changes. Have and enforce a robust password policy. If you're an organization that has just been doing work and getting the job done, and you haven't updated your policies yet, go out and find a good password policy and send it to everybody in your organization. Robust passwords, don't include 1, 2, 3, 4. They don't include your partner's name, your pet, your phone number. Okay, none of those things are appropriate. So as much as you hear things like don't share information about your past schooling details online or best friend from when you were a kid, don't do any of that, but also don't use them in your passwords. Today, the most common passwords are still 1 through 6, 1 through 8. Ridiculous. Admin is still a common password. You need to change your passwords, and your company needs to enforce it with a password policy. Ensure that timeouts are built into your applications. If somebody's at home, in particular now where it's easy to get distracted, and again, I've had that where, I have 2 dogs and 2 kids all pulling at different limbs trying to get me to go and help them. I get into more details where one of them's throwing up and the other one's racing to the bathroom. Those are not fun mornings for anybody, but it's even worse if I've left an application open and it becomes compromised. So build timeouts into applications, ensure that you're re-authenticating anybody who's coming in, especially if you're dealing with any kind of a confidential system. And finally, if you're going a little more advanced, centrally you can build health checks on devices. Coming in, you'd need some IT help for this. This is checking the credentials on a machine before it is allowed to connect to the network, ensuring that antivirus is up to date and various other basic health checks on those endpoints. That will help secure your network and your data as well. Finally, securing endpoints. So the last of the technology elements is the machines themselves. So I suspect everybody on this call is sitting in front of either a notebook or a webcam on a desktop or their phone. So all of those are endpoints. They all need to be protected. As a company, you want to be mandating patch management for all work endpoints that are distributed. You want to ensure that you periodically test passwords against your company policy. and there are many password testing solutions out there. Distribute a standardized antivirus solution, whether it's centrally managed or simply centrally distributed. Make sure everybody's operating at the same basic level of protection. And control your admin rights on each of those desktops. It's really easy for your kids to get a hold of a computer and suddenly upload or download a number of programs that get installed on that machine that bring with them, you know, everything and anything that's out in the big bad world. So it's important that you lock down your desktop, lock down those endpoints so that they are work-only endpoints. Disaster recovery and business continuity. So most of us are not working off disaster recovery plans at the moment. There weren't any earthquakes. There weren't any, you know, significant events that happened to destroy parts of our businesses. We're working off business continuity plans. And that distinction is, you've had an event, how do you continue to do business? And the event said you're not allowed to access your physical location anymore. Ideally, and larger companies will have had this all in place with annual dry runs. Think of anywhere you've worked where they've run fire drills, right? There's a policy around the fires. Then there's a warden on the floor. Then there's a fire drill every 6 months or every year. Well, this is the same thing, except it covers when you are not able to operate the way you would normally operate. So this might include having cloud. If you run locally most of the time, the ability to flip over to the cloud and start using a backup copy. It might include having connectivity at people's homes. It might include having 2 networks at people's homes. And we'll talk a bit about that redundancy and how you can actually help to protect your business by paying for extra lines at your remote resources work locations. And then this is a great time. You've never been faced with something like this. Okay, most of you haven't been faced with anything like this before. Working remotely, 100% of your team is very challenging. You need to innovate your business, but equally importantly, you need to take the time to ensure that your business continuity plan was effective. And if it wasn't in place, that you draft one using this as an experience to make it a very realistic plan. All right, so for the next little bit, I'm going to talk about how to secure your home environment. I know this is likely the thing that drew everybody to want to hear some tips today. And it really is you sitting at home, looking at your environment and saying, okay, what do I need to do to protect myself, to protect my family, and to protect my work data and information. So we'll cover these 6 main areas. Again, under policies, and you'll see some repeating, some redundancy in here. There are a lot of things that are applicable both for companies and the individuals that they're supporting, just from a different perspective. As an individual, make sure you're reviewing all relevant company policies. You need to take the initiative, if you haven't got a copy of them or can't access them, to contact someone in the organization, or take the initiative to pull a template off of the web and recommend it to your company. No matter how big or small you are, these are things that are important, and above all else, they help improve awareness. And we're talking about a half an hour, an hour to read through all of the policies and keep them top of mind as you're faced with a remote work environment. Understand the company password policy and follow it for all devices on the network used for work. So wherever you're plugging your work machine into, follow that same password policy for the router, for all the endpoints. Make sure that anybody else connecting to that network is following that policy as well. If everyone in the house is compliant with a complex password, but your 8-year-old is still using puppy, it doesn't really help. You're only as strong as your weakest link. Keep up to date with online security education modules. Again, if your company's not offering them, sit in on a call like this, but equally important, find yourself some online resources, watch those entertaining videos. They're available everywhere. They are engaging. They might have a quiz at the end. It's going to keep you aware. It doesn't take a lot of your time, And it's important to keep that awareness level up. Home networks. We're all operating off of home networks. And the challenge again is, unless IT has always been top of mind, you haven't configured your home network with the same degree of sophistication that you have at the office. So from a preventive point of view, trying to protect your work information from attack, consider running a second network that's dedicated to work. And again, this is something for employers to consider, where if you're going to have anybody working from home for a significant amount of time, it may be important for you to consider paying for that second work dedicated network. And then people at home, resources at home, critical that you not introduce other devices to that network other than those that are supplied from your workplace. Make sure that your network and device passwords aren't just complex, but are unique. Reusing the same password is one of the top attack vectors. Once somebody finds one of your passwords somewhere, if it's been reused, they will just hammer every service out in the cloud and locally to try to penetrate your security. So the same complex password used 100 different times isn't sufficient to meet password requirements. And finally, and if you don't know how to do this either, again, look it up. Google is your friend. You know, do searches, ask us emails. We're happy to answer questions. Keep firmware up to date in your hardware. You have a router at home, you have other technology at home. Ensure that it is either set to automatically update or you are manually updating your patches on a regular basis. Gaps in patches allow old threats to become new problems for you. So patches and security updates need to be maintained for all of the firmware in your home network. Endpoints, again, sounds familiar. We're all working off endpoints at home. It's important that you understand all of the endpoints that attach to your network. The reason I say that is, if for whatever reason somebody's made the mistake of clicking on that ransomware email or introducing a virus into the system, if you don't know all of the devices that have connected to the network, then you may leave that virus sitting on one or two of the devices to reinfect everything after you think you've cleared it. So we've heard of this before in companies where they didn't have a complete inventory. They were attacked. A consultant came in, cleared everything, cleaned it all up, restored it back up. Everybody went back to work. And somebody who hadn't brought their machine in to be cleared plugs back into the network, reinfects every endpoint and the network. So make sure that you've got an inventory of all the devices connected to the network that you're using for work. Make sure that you restrict the use of devices on your work-related home network. If you have a work notebook, don't put your kids on it. I know it's tempting and you may only have one machine, then you need to supervise it if you want to maintain a level of cybersecurity. Kids are so smart and so intuitive. They will do things before you even have a chance to blink. I laughed a couple of weeks ago. I asked my 7-year-old he was asking me a question about something. I said, okay, well, look it up on your phone. He's got an old tablet, right? That's just connected to our network. So I expected him to type the words into a Google search. He hit the microphone button and started talking to the tablet. He didn't even think about typing in a search. He doesn't use the keyboard. He just clicks the microphone and talks to it. So, I mean, you think you're anticipating what your kids might do on the machine. I'm telling you that you're not. So don't let them on your work machines. It will compromise in ways that you can't even imagine that they've done whatever they've done, and will have trouble working it back. Turn off devices when not in use. Make sure you're shutting them down, logging out of the operating system. You don't want to leave things just open. This will come up again when we talk about data. Ensure that you are running current antivirus software on all machines on the network. Any machine, you are only as strong as your weakest link, okay? It is critical that you address all of the areas. This is the reason that you go for frameworks when you look at cybersecurity, the reason that you look at guidance that goes across a whole set of information like this is you don't want to it's all about not missing one of the elements that you don't think of in the moment. So turn off your devices, ensure current antivirus is running all devices, and that you've updated all security patches. All right, what we're doing now, video conferencing. If any of you haven't seen the Saturday Night Live skit from the weekend where they did the Zoom call, it was priceless, probably representative of way too many meetings that people are having now. Make sure that you block or turn your camera off when not in use. Cameras, once they're compromised, everything that you put in front of it is being recorded somewhere. Before beginning any call, stand behind the camera and look at what is in frame. So one of the things that I find challenging, and I think we all do, when you're looking at yourself in a shot like we are now, you're really focusing on how you look. It's really difficult for you to look around the screen and be thinking about, oh, well, is this piece of paper visible? And what about this thing on my desk? Right? You're looking at you, your hair, I'm looking at my glasses. Is the glare too much? What you really need to do is stand on the other side and look back, because as you're tilting the camera, you might pick something up that you didn't think was in frame when you started the call. Nothing confidential should be anywhere in your field of vision from the other side of the camera. Conduct your calls from a private location. So ideally you lock the door. I know that's not always practical. Again, be aware of what's behind you. Be aware of what people can see when they're looking at your call. Be aware of the fact that if a cat or a dog runs across your keyboard, that you could unlock something that that you're not intending to. Working from home is challenging. Again, two dogs and 2 kids, and doorbell rings, and that's all it takes. So make sure that you're taking some precautions around that. Only use software that's approved by your organization. And I'm going to preface sort of a lot of this with, be risk appropriate. I'm not here to make you scared or fearmonger or anything. If you're chatting with your parents, how much confidential information are you sharing? If you're doing a family reunion Zoom call, if you're just chatting with somebody else from work on a social call or dealing with non-confidential information, the tools you consider don't need to have the highest level of security. But if you're providing a medical consult and you've used a tool that has major security flaws, then you are creating a problem for yourself. So make sure you are risk appropriate when deciding whether or not a tool works for you for that particular situation. For example, there's no reason not to be using Zoom for this particular session. But if we were having a therapy session and you were all my therapist, this would be wholly inappropriate. So use software approved by your organization. Make sure that if certain software has been banned, that you're not using it inadvertently. And finally, in terms of privacy, don't be sharing pictures of calls like this or anything else that you do unless you've got explicit permission from the people that were on that call and in those images. Data storage and transfer. Again, slightly more technical, but still really relevant when it comes to understanding what it is that you're protecting and how you're protecting it. Emails can contain confidential information, so only use email and messaging tools that are approved and used in your organization. Don't be, suddenly flipping to Gmail just because, or Hotmail, because that happens to be open on your screen. Avoid storing files on your local machine. Make sure you are storing, in particular, confidential files. They need to be stored in a secure place in the network. Avoid using removable storage. It's really easy to plug a USB key in and just move some files onto it. Don't. That is a risk. It's a risk that you don't need to take or want to take. Be aware of acceptable communication channels for when you receive a suspicious message. So I work with somebody who, when they send a message, they don't like to put too much in the way of wording around it. So it'll just be, look at this, and then a link. And you know what? Every time I send that person back a text or I call them or I go onto our messaging tool and say, okay, did you send this message? Because it looks like it's spam. It looks like it's a phishing email. No, I sent it to you. Okay, good. Don't ever be afraid to follow up using a second channel to ensure that the communication is legitimate. If you got a Groupon email and you're super excited to get that grocery delivery at half price, talk to other people, go online and look for it. Make sure that there isn't a published information saying that it's a scam. You just want to be aware and be careful when it comes to clicking on links and emails. Finally, log out of your applications when not in use. It might feel like a pain in the butt to log out and log in and log out and log in, but it's a great way to increase your risk, just leaving everything unlocked on your machine as you step away. All right, we're just about done, and then I can take a few questions in case anybody's got something specific that they want to cover. Shut the front door. Yeah, this is, again, one of those challenging elements we don't think of at home. At work, we've got key cards and codes and keys. At home, you're going for a walk around the block. Oh, we're just going to leave the door open. It's no big deal. Yeah, store your devices out of sight. Make sure that they're not visible from outside the house. Ensure doors and windows are locked or an alarm is set when you go for that walk. You need to get out and get some sun. It's not a question. It's just a fact. You need to be getting some exercise. But there's nothing worse than coming home to a house that's been compromised, ransacked, and had work devices compromised. And now you're stressed about talking to somebody in your IT department about the fact that your laptop's been stolen. Right? Take some simple steps to prevent that from happening by keeping things out of sight, and turn those devices off so that even if they are compromised, you've added that layer of security. Physical security is one of those elements people don't think of when it comes to cyber because of the word cyber. The reality is cybersecurity is about protecting your data, and your data resides on those physical machines. Finally, just want to remind everybody, hopefully these tips have been helpful. I want you to continue to stay home, stay safe like we all are, and look forward to when we can all see each other in person again. Thank you so much, and let me know if you have any questions.
You're invited to ask questions. You can unmute, or you can send a chat if you have any questions. Jeff, I do have to say one thing. When you talked the last slide about shut the door and lock it, I almost seem like that's everything that I have to do with my laptop and my communications. If I follow the rules for what I have to do when I'm leaving my home, I guess if I follow the same rules for my IT usage, it should cover everything then.
You do, and that's, you know, the real challenge is just that when you're at home, you don't think of all the steps that you take at work to stay safe.
Yeah.
You're in a more relaxed environment, and you're just trying to get things done amidst all the noise.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting that back, you know, making sure that you're still aware as you sit down with a work device that it is a work device, and you need to take the same precautions that you would have if you were in the office.
Okay. I don't think we have any questions. It's just a thank you, a valuable session comment.
Perfect. If anybody has any follow-ups at any point, you know, reach out to anybody you know who's in security. They can give you at least the basics. Feel free to reach out to me. We've got a team of folks who can answer any of your questions. Just as an aside to anybody who's got small businesses out there who's trying to help their employees, in the next week or so, we're going to distribute a free tool for anybody to use that lets home-based resources fill in a survey, an assessment of their home environment, and that goes directly to whoever manages IT for the company. We're making it available for free to everyone, and it really covers a lot of the last few points in the presentation so that companies can go out and actually help their teams decide who to call and what they need to do to help them improve their security.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Informative. A lot of things for us to remember if we want to stay safe. I just want to thank you all for participating today. We're trying to hold as many of these types of sessions. We're going to be, for the next little while, providing you more updates on the situation with COVID-19, as well as we're developing some learning sessions, professional development sessions for you that will be starting in May. But for now, if you don't mind, if you would like to know about what we're hosting, visit our event page at apboardoftrade.com/events. You will see our event calendar. Our cybersecurity today, we have the City of Pickering Small Business Town Hall this afternoon. If you have not registered for that, you can register on our website. And we also have a session next week, very interesting, on what do you do when challenging times challenges you. So it's nice to sometimes have somebody to talk to or to listen, just to hear what other people are thinking and saying and doing at this time. So we hope you'll join us for that, okay? Otherwise, we're all here for you. Our website, apboardoftrade.com. If you look at our COVID page, you will soon, this session will be on there, as well as other recordings that we did for whether COVID or professional developments as well. It's on there for a while for you, resources for COVID and ideas. And we're looking forward to hearing from you with any suggestions or comments you may have for the Board of Trade. Okay. Thank you, Jeff, for presenting this for us. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful, successful day.
Great, thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.